The neon sign of the courtroom at Fort Hood flickered through the heavy Texas humidity, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. Inside, the atmosphere carried the suffocating weight of an institution that rarely questioned itself. Sitting at the defense table was Specialist Elijah Brooks, a 23-year-old drone maintenance technician from South Side Chicago. He wore his Class A dress uniform, the fabric crisp, the metals aligned precisely to the millimeter, but beneath the rigid posture, his hands were trembling. Brooks was facing a special court-martial for alleged insubordination and the destruction of government property, a laptop containing classified diagnostic software that had turned up shattered in a dumpster behind the motor pool. To an outsider, the case seemed like a straightforward disciplinary issue. But to anyone who knew the internal mechanics of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ, the numbers told a completely different story. For the exact same incident 3 months prior, a white specialist in the same company had received nothing more than a non-judicial punishment, a quiet reprimand under Article 15, a minor reduction in pay, and a weekend of extra duty. Brooks, however, was being pushed toward a federal felony conviction and a bad conduct discharge. The system had bypassed leniency entirely, escalating his case into a criminal spectacle. Across the room, prosecuting attorney Captain Thomas Vance adjusted his tie, confidently shuffling a stack of reprimands and character assessments. Vance didn't see race, he saw metrics. In his eyes, Brooks was a statistical anomaly that needed correction, a soldier with a vocal attitude who didn't fit the cultural mold of the unit's leadership. What Vance ignored, or perhaps chose not to see, was the stack of independent reports gathering dust on congressional desks back in Washington. Government Accountability Office, GAO, data explicitly outlined that Black and Hispanic service members were up to twice as likely as their white peers to face military justice investigations and courts-martial for identical infractions. As the military judge entered the room and the gavel slammed down, the trial of Elijah Brooks began. It was a localized drama playing out in a quiet Texas courtroom, but it was anchored to a massive, systemic fault line within the American military machine. The defense was about to present its first witness, unaware that uncovering the truth behind a broken laptop would mean tearing open the classified underbelly of the Pentagon's justice system. The courtroom grew stiflingly quiet as Captain Sarah Martinez, a military defense counsel who had spent years navigating the tight-knit politics of Fort Hood, called her first major witness, Master Sergeant Derek Ross. Ross was a 20-year veteran, a Black non-commissioned officer who had built his career on absolute adherence to the rules. He took the stand, his chest heavy with ribbons from Fallujah and Kandahar, his face an unreadable mask of military discipline. Martinez bypassed the specifics of the broken laptop and went straight for the heart of the unit's operational culture. She submitted command climate survey data into evidence, internal, anonymous questionnaires that the Pentagon used to gauge morale and bias within individual battalions. The numbers on the screen were stark. Under the current command, minor disciplinary infractions by minority soldiers were systematically documented in writing, creating a paper trail of problem behavior, while identical infractions by white soldiers were handled informally over coffee or a smoke behind the barracks. As Captain Vance loudly objected, claiming the line of questioning was irrelevant to the property damage charge, the systemic trap closing around Specialist Brooks became undeniable. Brooks's permanent file had been weaponized against him. It was littered with formal counseling statements for disrespectful body language and tone, minor behavioral notes that Captain Vance was now using to paint Brooks as a chronic troublemaker deserving of a court-martial. When Martinez cross-examined the company commander, she forced him to admit that no white soldier in the history of his command had ever received a formal reprimand for body language. The legal battle had shifted from a simple case of vandalism to an interrogation of the military's unwritten rules. In the gallery, a handful of Brooks's fellow soldiers watched the proceedings in tense silence, realizing that the trial was exposing the exact mechanism outlined in the GAO reports. The military justice system didn't necessarily invent racism out of whole cloth, but its reliance on command discretion allowed subconscious biases to dictate who got a second chance and who got a criminal record. With the prosecution's star witness, the technician who allegedly saw Brooks near the dumpster, about to take the stand, the trial was moving dangerously close to exposing a deliberate frame-up. The prosecution's star witness, Sergeant First Class Bradley Miller, took the stand with the practiced confidence of a career soldier. Miller was the motor pool chief, the man who had officially reported finding the shattered diagnostic laptop and claimed to have seen Specialist Brooks leaving the area under the cover of dusk. Under direct examination by Captain Vance, Miller's testimony seemed airtight, painting a picture of a resentful, insubordinate minority soldier sabotaging critical unit equipment out of spite. But when Captain Martinez stepped up for the cross-examination, she didn't look at Miller. She looked at the digital maintenance logs projected on the courtroom screen. Through meticulous forensic tracking of the broken laptop's internal hard drive, data retrieved by a sympathetic cybersecurity warrant officer, Martinez revealed a devastating timeline. The laptop had ceased functioning and suffered catastrophic physical impact at 14:30 in the afternoon. At that exact hour, digital gateswipe logs proved Brooks was 3 miles away at the base medical clinic. The person logged into the maintenance network using the admin override at 14:30 was none other than Sergeant First Class Miller himself. The courtroom erupted into whispered chaos. Martinez pressed forward, entering into evidence a series of recovered text messages from an encrypted group chat used by the upper-tier NCOs of the battalion. The messages revealed a calculated effort to purge the problem elements from the unit before an upcoming deployment. The language used in the texts wasn't openly hateful. It was coded in the modern bureaucracy of institutional bias. Phrases like unfit for our culture, ghetto attitude, and needs to be made an example of. Miller had accidentally dropped the expensive equipment, and instead of taking the blame, he and the leadership chose the easiest target available, the outspoken black specialist who already had a manufactured paper trail of disciplinary issues. As the judge called an immediate recess, the true nature of the trial was laid bare. This wasn't a failure of a single broken laptop. It was the vivid, terrifying manifestation of a legal system where command discretion could be weaponized to destroy a minority soldier's life to protect the mistakes of the old guard. Specialist Brooks sat at the defense table, the crushing weight of a potential federal conviction suddenly lifting, but replaced by a chilling realization of how easily the military machine could have crushed him if the digital ghosts of the hard drive hadn't spoken up. The courtroom reconvened under a suffocating tension. The revelation of the encrypted group chat and the falsified maintenance timelines had completely shattered the prosecution's case. Captain Vance sat in stone-faced silence, his career ambitions evaporating in real time, while the military judge, a stern colonel with decades of bench experience, stared down at the prosecution table with cold fury. Recognizing that the entire command structure of the battalion was on the verge of a public, systemic meltdown, the government moved swiftly to contain the damage. Behind closed doors in the judge's chambers, Captain Vance offered a complete dismissal of all charges against Specialist Brooks with prejudice, meaning they could never be refiled. It was a total legal victory for the defense, but as Brooks and Captain Martinez stepped back into the Texas heat outside the courthouse, there were no celebrations. The dismissal of the charges was designed to do one thing: silence the story. By dropping the case, the military effectively closed the record, preventing the damning evidence of institutional bias and toxic NCO group chats from becoming part of a permanent, public federal precedent. Sergeant First Class Miller was quietly reassigned to another base pending an internal administrative review, a corporate military euphemism that guaranteed his misconduct would be handled far away from the public eye. Brooks stood in the parking lot, looking at his pristine uniform. He was legally cleared, but the psychological fabric of his military career was permanently ruined. He had done everything right. He had served honorably, mastered his technical craft, and trusted the chain of command, only to discover that the system's default setting was to protect its own hierarchy at the expense of his freedom. He realized that for every Elijah Brooks who had a dedicated lawyer and a digital paper trail to save them, there were thousands of other minority service members quietly sitting in military brigs, victims of a discretionary justice system that left no digital fingerprints. 6 months after the gavel fell at Fort Hood, the name Elijah Brooks had disappeared from the active duty rosters, replaced by a quiet honorable discharge and a one-way ticket back to Chicago. The system had successfully buried the scandal, absorbing the shockwaves of the trial within its dense, bureaucratic layers. No press releases were issued, no systemic overhauls were announced, and the battalion's leadership continued its preparations for deployment, the missing laptop written off as an administrative error. The conclusion to Brooks's story is the conclusion to the crisis facing the entire Department of Defense. The most dangerous threat to the American military justice system isn't overt, flagrant racism, but the hidden, legally sanctioned biases embedded within command discretion. When the Government Accountability Office publishes its sterile, numbers-heavy reports showing deep racial disparities in military courts-martial, this is what it looks like in reality. It is a system where 2 soldiers commit the exact same infraction, but their fates are decided by a chain of command that interprets one as a good kid who made a mistake and the other as a cultural misfit who needs to be purged. By giving commanders nearly absolute authority over who faces a court-martial and who gets a quiet second chance, the Uniform Code of Military Justice has allowed subconscious cultural biases to weaponize the law. As the American military struggles to project its moral and strategic superiority on the global stage, its deepest vulnerability remains internal. An institution that demands its soldiers be willing to die for the ideals of blind justice and equality cannot survive if those same soldiers discover that the scales of justice inside the barracks are tipped by the color of their skin. Specialist Brooks walked away with his freedom, but the system walked away unchanged, leaving a ticking demographic and moral time bomb at the very heart of the nation's defense.